This is Tuesday Morning Ryan, episode number 21, and today we have Prem Bhatia with us, who is the co-founder of Cooleaf. Cooleaf's an app that really helps with employee engagement, and if you want to work somewhere great and you want to know how to engage employees, Cooleaf's a good app to do that. So I'm big on employee engagement. I've written about it. We're big about it at Risk 360. So Prem, thanks for being here, man. I'm very excited about this conversation.
Yeah, thank you, Christian. Appreciate the time.
Yeah, so another Atlanta entrepreneur, which we talk to many of those from time to time. Like one way I like to start off is love to hear your story. Like, how did you decide to make the leap, start a business, quitting the stable job to do a startup? Can you talk a little bit about that? Just kind of your background history.
Yeah, it's been a while, so we've been at it for a while now. So I don't even it's hard to even remember those days, right? But yeah, we actually started. I met my co-founder Sarwar at I was in a corporate job in product management at McKesson, large healthcare IT company based in Alpharetta. They actually spun that out and now call it Change Healthcare, but anyways, at the time it was McKesson. And I met Sarwar. We used to just kind of riff over things at lunchtime and just talk through concepts that we had. And we were kind of shaking things up a little bit when we were there in terms of, why do we do it this way? Like, we're presenting things that kind of to senior levels of the team members and saying we got to revamp this, and here's kind of a concept that we put together. And so we realized that we riffed well together, and decided that hey, we should be thinking about doing some things on our own. And at the time, he used to work with this guy John Duesberg, who's our third co-founder at a company called Availity before he went to McKesson. And so he kind of brought in John, and three of us actually were contracting, consulting, and doing nights and weekends a lot in the beginning, and then eventually made the leap into going into a full-time, hey, let's give this a shot. We raised a little bit of friends and family money. We were fortunate enough to be able to do that. And that took us to a point where when we initially started the company, we were pretty different than where we are today. We were a fairly different company at that point. And then really just raised a little bit of angel money. We were able to get enough traction to kind of raise a small extension in terms of angel, friends, family. Then we're off to the races in terms of a tech accelerator. Raised another round. We're able to get more momentum, made some pivots and strategic decisions around the business, and have now gotten to a point where we've built the business to kind of where it is today.
Were you guys SaaS from the start, or did you start off doing any kind of consulting or anything like that?
Yeah, we were, I should say we were definitely a lot different. In the beginning, the early days of the company were B2C actually. We started as a B2C wellness play, and we pivoted into B2B services, and then made the pivot into B2B SaaS. We had SaaS components to the services side of what we were doing, but we were just learning a ton of what really employers wanted at that point through just services, and we're able to develop the product further as a result.
Yeah, when we first started Risk 360, we were doing everything. We were contracting with other businesses for a while, doing one-off consulting gigs, and then we kind of formalized our business model.
Yeah.
Were there things you guys did to de-risk yourself? Did it feel like a huge risk jumping ship? How am I going to pay the bills, that kind of thing? Or did you have one or two clients short up before you made the leap?
Yeah, no, it was, there was definitely some days there where we're oof, it's gonna be tough. I don't know if this is gonna happen, honestly.
Yeah.
So we were able to, we made a lot of sacrifices, I think, and we still have made, sacrifices relative to, paying ourselves and things like that. Early days, there were a lot of years there that and every entrepreneur will tell you this, where it was just skinny for the founders in terms of what we're paying ourselves. Yep. Right.
Yep.
And those were decisions that kind of forged our ability to be look, I know my co-founders now, we're willing to do that. So it's not an issue. And, we know we've always done the best thing for Cooleaf as a business. So, we definitely de-risked to some extent by hedging through things like consulting and contracting, and then, bringing in some services type stuff that we were doing early days that probably we wouldn't even entertain to do right now at this point, right?
Yep.
Because it just
Same.
doesn't make sense, right? But you had to do what you had to do at the early days, right?
Yep. Absolutely. Same thing. I remember we took gigs that were in no way scalable or repeatable, but you had to do
Yeah.
them to like,
Yeah.
get the next couple months in. So
Yeah. Broke the Paul Graham rule of like do things. Well, you actually know you follow that, right? Do things that don't scale, right?
yeah, yeah.
So
How
uh,
did you guys like? I feel like employee engagement is something you have to be passionate about. Like, you can't fake it. You can't build a company around employee engagement and not like actually care about that thing. So when did you know from the start that like that area was something that you're interested in, or is it something that kind of manifests itself over time to you guys?
yeah, I mean, I think the thread that's run through the company throughout has been about being being a place that actually helps people and is about people. Um, and that's never really changed, right? Like that's been true of the earliest days. I think the methodology of doing that in a way that maybe talks to the individual in a B2C manner versus, talks to executives and leaders that want to do better with their employees.
Hmm.
It's always the same end result, right? Like so I think what we are definitely passionate about this idea that I think is becoming getting to the more of the mainstream and to the forefront, which is like, there's been years now that companies have been able to sort of run roughshod over anything they want to do without really any concern of any stakeholder except for shareholders, right? And we saw some of that change about a year and a half ago. There was like a big deal that Jamie Dimon and a bunch of folks like signed off in the Business Roundtable to say that they're larger than just the stakeholders being shareholders. It also encompasses employees and it encompasses things like the environment.
Yeah.
And so we were a little bit early to the game, I would say. But what's happening now is we're starting to have the market catch up to where we've always been and where the leading edge of companies have always been, and it's becoming much more mainstream. And so I think like that crossing the chasm type thing
Yep.
is
Yep.
starting to happen a little bit more towards where I think we're really well aligned.
So thinking about, so let's talk a little bit about Cooleaf. I know I used to work at a place that used Cooleaf, which was how I was
Yeah,
exposed to you guys. And
yeah,
I think from an outsider's perspective, I thought it was just cool that the employer was using it. Like they cared enough to have such an app.
right,
And then getting on there, we had subcultures. So like one group would use it maybe a little more than the others. And it was just kind of a cool app to know that your
yeah.
employer cared enough about that. So can you talk about like what is Cooleaf? Like what kind of initiatives does it do for organizations, that kind of thing?
Yeah, for sure. So Cooleaf is we're a technology company that focuses in on the employee experience, and essentially what our purpose is to ensure that um, really organizations can provide extraordinary employee experiences for every individual that comes through the doors, basically the virtual doors or the physical doors, whatever it might be. We're doing some work outside of employee experience that's relatively small part of our business now that we anticipate growing as well around product experience and customer experience.
Mm.
But really, we're focused pretty heavily right now on employee experience. And the idea is that when you think about employee experience, we break it down to three kind of core components. One is a phenomenal, extraordinary, employee experience requires an employer to listen to their folks, to listen to their people, and do so in a way that is strategic, but also is not just once a year, it's constant.
Yep.
And so we've built in capabilities around pulse surveying. We've also built in this idea that listening can't just be qualitative, it has to actually be quantitative as well. So we deeply integrate into platforms like SalesLoft, Salesforce, Zendesk, HubSpot, other platforms like learning platforms, Litmos, Lessonly, you name it. There's tons of different SaaS integrations that we've developed
Sure.
to allow for both quantitative listening and qualitative listening. So the idea is that you've got a team of people, they're dispersed around the world potentially now, around the country. Some of them may be coming back into physical. Most of them are going to be staying virtual. Some of them may be like a mix of two. When you're working like that, You've got SaaS platforms that you're mainly doing a lot of your core your sort of core activities around. So we listen to both the SaaS signals, and we also listen to pulsing. So we provide the ability to do pulse surveying to our for employers to do that to their employees, as well as, like I said, listen to those quantitative signals.
Yeah.
We then take the second step, which is the first step then is listen. The second step is then engage, right? So once you've taken and ingested that data, what do you do with it? What actions can you take? Should you, for example, do a better job at recognizing and rewarding and highlighting the accomplishments of your team? Should you, for example, have data that tells you you should run performance incentive, small challenges, or small incentive, different campaigns that you can run? Are you listening to the types of programming that your employees want and developing things like wellness programming, health and wellness programming, diversity and inclusion programming? We provide a partnership to our customers to help them with programming around that through things like company challenges, their own events that they might be doing. So listen, engage them, and then really measure what you're doing. So across those performance incentives, those recognition rewards, those virtual challenges and activities that are happening through our platform, there's a lot of data that's being generated around that. How do you take that, iterate your strategy? What's working well? What's working different? What's not working so well? Where's that working well? What departments, divisions, which locations should we be focusing in on? We provide a slew of analytics around that, from executive dashboards as well as sort of manager level dashboarding, to help with those decisions and really understand those investments that you're making on the employee experience. How are they working? What do you need to tweak and optimize, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I read and I wrote some stuff about, there's this Gallup poll that came out that talks about employee engagement. And some of the things that it highlighted was, for example, the relationships that you have are important, like the level of engagement a manager has to the employee. And some of the things we do at Risk 360 is like we run like a 100-mile relay race. We have like a coaching program. We have all these things that we're trying to like be authentic about caring about each other, which you can't fake.
Yeah.
So that translates into a question for you. I imagine you guys probably have some customers that, are the top performers of employee engagement, and then some that are not the top performers. Mm-hmm. Have you noticed any patterns in terms of like what are the really good employers doing that are top notch in terms of engagement and employee satisfaction versus the ones that aren't?
Yeah. So it's actually like kind of funny because it's pretty simple. Like the first thing beyond anything that you need to have for this to work, and the most important thing, is executive leadership all the way up to the CEO that believes in caring for their people.
Yeah.
And that believes that, people oftentimes with Millennial and Gen Z have not been given the fair shake that prior generations have relative to things like student debt, relative to things like, pensions, relative to things like unions, right? Like there's a lot that this, upcoming generation, current generation in the workplace today, and obviously with Gen Z now, has not been dealt in terms of their hand. And so the real question is, do you care for people, right? Now, if you just see your business as like, yeah, I want to make a bunch of money and, I'm interested in driving forward no matter what. I don't really care. I can always find another person to do this job. Probably not the best fit for us in terms of a customer, right?
Yeah.
And so what we find is that the best customers already believe in doing great things like that. They potentially are even doing things like becoming B Corps themselves, or they're really interested in getting on the top workplace lists, or maybe they already are on the top workplace list. We worked with a number of folks that are already there, have like stayed towards the top of that list. And we've worked with folks that aspire to do much better and to raise up in those rankings, or to even get on the rankings in the first place, right? And that's the most critical ingredient to what we do. It's that buy-in at the leadership level that, hey, like we have a lot as executives, and, what we should be thinking about now is what's happening in the world and how people are thinking about this from an employee standpoint, the types of things they're looking for. You might have been able to get away with things that you probably won't be able to get away with now as we start entering a period of fairly rapid and aggressive growth over the next year and a half, 2 years, as most economists forecast, right? So we feel like we're well positioned both in terms of the generational change that's happening in the
Yeah.
workplace, as well as the leadership changes that are starting to happen. You're starting to see things like boomers retiring, and you're starting to see Gen X rise into leadership ranks. And Gen X thinks about things very differently than boomers have. And
Yeah.
traditionally, that's been, a little bit of an issue, I think, in the workplace. And so as you see that generational momentum shift, um, we believe that right now it's still perceived by many organizations as this nice to have, but it's getting to a point where if you don't have an answer for how you do public recognition, how you quickly incentivize certain actions, and you don't believe that the work itself is getting atomized even further into smaller components, and you don't have an answer to address how you incentivize specific areas, how you streamline the way in which you recognize and reward, how you make it systematic as opposed to one-off and informal, then we're probably not going to be a great fit. But if you already believe in those things, you're already doing things around them, you want to do better, you think there's ways to automate some of that, we're going to be a great fit,
Yeah.
right?
I think just being a fairly new business owner, so been in this for like 5 years. One of the things I think I took for granted before starting a business is like the level of expectations that employees have to their employer in terms of. I think people derive a lot of their meaning and purpose from work, which, that makes sense, right? I do personally.
Sure.
And maybe that's a new phenomena in society. Like people used to be more religious, so maybe they're less religious now, so work becomes more.
Sure.
In this world, we're more decentralized in the COVID world, so a lot of the human action that we're forced to have is through work. So I'm seeing like these trends of these types of patterns, meaning that the expectations for employers are higher and higher in terms of filling gaps in people's lives more than just a paycheck. And is that just me, or are you guys noticing those same trends in terms of like over the last 10 years you guys been doing this? Is this a phenomenon that you're noticing or no?
Yeah, I think there's this, what you see with large tech companies right now,
Mm-hmm.
particularly Microsoft, and we partner with Microsoft, we partner with Slack in terms of, deep integrations. We don't look to be the ecosystem for employee experience across every facet from a transactional standpoint, but what we are doing is deeply integrating into those platforms to allow for seamless recognition and incentives to happen for much more driven and sort of like engaging campaigns and challenges that can be run through those platforms and can be integrated deeply into those platforms. The nice thing about where we are today is that the ecosystem is maturing to the extent that we believe there's going to be two or three major ecosystems that we're going to be seeing.
Yeah.
One of them is Viva and Teams, which is Microsoft. The second is Slack and Salesforce. And the third is sort of everything else, right? And that encompasses like just not anything at all, right? Or, hey, we're moving to really clunky intranet or whatever it might be. Like, we're
Sure.
moving away from that. I think Microsoft is really the one that we've honed in on and said, these the maturing of these ecosystems and the employee experience space is actually a really big deal for us right now because it allows us to really deeply integrate and not try to convince of the first sort of sale that you need, which is employee experience is important. Those we look at kind of employee experience at three levels. One is sort of the transactional level, right? Which is, can I find what I need to do, where I need to do it? Can I find the apps that I need to do? Where do I file my PTO? Like, what do I need to do in terms of like, checking my payroll, things like that? That's fairly well covered in terms of Dynamics and some of the things that Microsoft is doing in terms of, well, I should say like, the HRIS components as well. Like
Yeah.
that's really more in Microsoft's land. And what we see is the second component, which is the emotional and then the philosophical buy-in, right? Okay, so that's great. I've got a great tactical, sort of like logistical employee experience. How emotionally tied in, invested do I feel cared for? Do I feel like my opinion matters? Am I feeling like I'm recognized for my work? From the philosophical standpoint, do the core values actually mean anything? Are we actually embodying these core values? We can help with that second and third layer. We believe that the systematic sort of transactional layer being like sort of developed and matured is a really good thing for everyone because it allows us to say there's going to be a few major ecosystems right now and we're
Yeah.
maturing and we're continuing to develop much deeper integrations into these like sort of core
You're
ecosystems.
describing like a tech stack for Maslow's hierarchy of needs.
That's
And,
exactly right. That's exactly right. Right.
yeah.
So, yeah, that's absolutely it.
So in companies, for example, I was in a large company, and I think the company as a whole did really well. But then I would notice some subcultures, not so well. And I
Yep.
could also see that from company to company. And I was wondering, in the data in Cooleaf, can you guys kind of spot, are there indicators of either subcultures that are struggling culturally or from company to company? And what are those indicators?
Yeah. Yeah. So the stats and the data is clear that there's a very direct correlation between employee engagement and productivity. Those companies that have done even better jobs in terms of systemizing how their recognition works and how active engagement works show much higher levels of business outcomes. And there's numbers as high as like 10 to 12x higher in terms of business outcomes. Obviously, there's a tie-in to things like retention, productivity.
Yeah.
What we look at from our data standpoint is where parts of the organization and how the organization is delineated, the types of divisions, departments is all ingested in data when we onboard a customer. From there, what we're able to do is provide a overall glimpse, but also systematically kind of look at location, department, division, and look at trends around how well are employees being engaged in terms of their interplay with things like company events, challenges. How well are managers and line leaders doing at recognizing great work? How are we seeing what are we seeing in terms of the trends around surveying and pulsing? And a lot of what we're going to be doing now is the next phase of this company now is pulling in sort of the data from listening and being able to really turn that into AI-driven recommendations for actions, right? Best practices can be implemented on top of that basically say, both quantitative and qualitative data tell us something. A lot of times, like companies will just survey to death, but they won't actually do anything about that.
Yeah.
So, how can we turn that into action? So, but yeah, to your question, like all of that data resides within our platform. What we've actually completely revamped and are releasing now over the next month or so is a completely revamped version of our analytics that's going to be even sharper than where we are today, and provide for even more, depths of insight than you had even before. But these are data points that are critical for organizations that our CS, our customer success team, reviews with any of our customers typically on a quarterly basis, and through QBRs, like quarterly business reviews, we'll run through recommendations around these as well. Because a lot of them just don't, they don't bother necessarily to look at the data because they're busy with a ton of other things on their plate. So our job as a partner is to really have our CS team really look at that data with the customer, provide deeper recommendations around it, and then do a lot of prompting and a lot of nudging to the right individuals to get recognition moving, to get participation moving, to get engagement further moving, and to apply some of the lessons that we've learned across our spectrum of customers that we've worked with.
Yeah. Awesome. Are there milestones that you see? So, selfish question. So we're like 30 people, and I always wonder, like, at 50 or at 100 people, as you lose span of control as a leader, are there certain maturity steps or common things that when you're doing quarterly business reviews with your customers that are kind of needle moving activities that you see? Like, okay, you're 50 people, we always see this, or you're 100 people, we always see this, that kind of thing.
We usually start. Though we have customers that are smaller than this, I'd say like we typically start around 100, 150 employees. That's like that, I think Dunbar's number, right? Where you start seeing like a little less connectivity, a little bit more of like, I don't know who this person is. I don't know what's involved here, right? So we usually deal with companies and we do really well, I'd say between about 100 to about 5,000 employees, but very particularly 100 to about 1,000 is a really good spot for us as well.
Yeah.
And so these are typically like companies that are scaling up fairly quickly. It's not one particular characteristic. I'd say it's more of the idea that they're scaling quickly and they're starting to lose things that were easier to do at a smaller stage, right? When you start adding 30, 40 to headcount to a department, like 50, 60 headcount to another department, whatever it might be, the numbers, particularly with venture scale, kind of like scaling, the core values, the ability to like sort of define and reinforce culture becomes really difficult for a lot of C-level leaders. right? So
Absolutely.
that's more of the typical scenario. It's like either they've gotten there and they need help on the types of things that they've done. Maybe they've acquired, maybe they're trying to blend two cultures together, right? And we're seeing that play out with, I think, even where your former employer, right, like acquired another accounting firm, whatever it might be, and so that was a big concern is like, how do we bring these two together, right? So those are the types of challenges that we help our customers navigate.
Yep, makes total sense. So, I want to talk a little bit about like company building with you, because you've been in the Atlanta startup community for a while, and obviously started your own business. First topic is a lot of entrepreneurs are kind of wondering, do I raise capital immediately or do I try to bootstrap this thing?
Mhm.
If you had to start all over and you had a preference, do you have a opinion on like how should someone start a company and when should they start considering funding that type of thing?
Yeah, it's a loaded question, man.
Yep.
So I like it. I think it really just depends. I mean, the things were really different even 5 years ago here versus where they are now. Um, a lot of what's happened because of COVID is that we've democratized access to capital, right? So, like, 5 years ago, right? Even let's take 5 to 7 years ago, if your answer was like, yeah, we're building this great SaaS startup, or we're building B2C, whatever, it's like, yeah, great. You have some responses like, when are you going to get to the Valley? When are you coming out to New York City? When are you moving up to here? Like I used to live in New York City, so I'd like talk to folks and they're like, when are you moving back to the city, right? And now, not so much, right? Like now it's very, it's sort of like it basically what it did was within a span of about a year, we've completely democratized. And that's really honestly the way it should have been anyways, right? But it's just kind of like created this level playing field. I
Mhm.
don't think it's completely level quite yet, but I do think that what you're seeing with smaller funds, even some larger funds that are now being raised in the Atlanta area, in the Southeast, the ability to kind of like tap into folks that are, honestly, you can tap into folks in the Valley, you can tap into folks in New York. I mean, the only thing that's stopping is like level of hustle you have, right? There are definitely open opportunities here to raise from folks that were not open to Atlanta-based companies before that are very open to it now. And that's a sea change. That's a big deal. I mean, we're seeing it with monster rounds with Calendly. We're seeing
Yep.
it with Stored obviously came out with their series I think C now. Obviously the SalesLoft, one of our customers, has done really well like in terms of scaling up. Terminus has done just their C round. I mean, we're definitely at a stage now where I think the answer to the original question is okay. So what do you advise to like new entrepreneurs? I do think that venture is an asset class that is not appropriate for 95% plus of companies out there. Um, but if you believe that you're trying to build something really large, then strategic investor slash venture, makes a lot of sense. The expectations that come with a venture infusion of cash are very high. And so we've seen what happens as a result when those expectations are not met. And so, frankly, for us, it's like we've brought in capital from angels, and now we've recently, brought in some more capital from a strategic, and that part of that is because we need to get our motion going in such a way that it's completely scalable, completely repeatable, and we've seen glimmers of that, but I'd say um, for most companies it hurts you to bring that type of capital in very early. And the analogy that I heard from actually a venture guy like a while ago is like it's like plane fuel. It's like you can take it in, but it can like completely flood the engine, man, if you don't know what you're doing, right? And so it sounds like great to like bring in 5 to 10, maybe like 15, like whatever, into like a fairly early stage company. But it's really difficult to effectively deploy that capital if you haven't really mastered the motions and gotten your scar
Yeah.
tissue from doing a lot of things wrong, right?
Absolutely. You have to have the infrastructure to scale. The other thing that I've always thought about is when you take on VC funding, there's the implicit, perhaps explicit agreement to grow, right? So
Yeah.
how do you grow so quickly and still maintain your DNA, your culture, your discipline? A lot of sound business fundamentals. Like I think if you've never started a business, you want to start a business and you want to earn a profit. Well, if you're VC funded, you're not earning a profit. You're growing quickly, but you're deploying that capital responsibly to scale up until the next round of funding.
Yep.
And due to you kind of serve that market largely, that 100 to 1,000 person. Are there things that that you see work? Or let me ask it a different way. How do companies that are having hyper growth, how do they maintain their DNA and culture? Are there things that you see working?
Yeah. I mean, it's a lot of what we do, right? Is like helping with that. So like I think a lot of what we've seen, really work is core values is like this big thing that
Yeah.
like, a lot of companies talk about. And now I think what the writing is on the wall is like you can't just define those; they actually have to be lived. And so what we've done is provided a platform to tie core values into key recognitions that are happening across the organization and be able to understand how those core values are being propagated across the organization. Really having managers and line leaders, team leaders set the example of like what a great core value means. And so, look, we drink our own champagne. We like to say like, we do this in our own organization. We have like founder mentality is one of our core values. And that really what that means is initiative to really take on anything and not think about, should I do this? It's like, hey, I did this or I'm about to do this. This is kind of what I'm thinking. Here's why I think this is the right way to do it. That's founder mentality to us. It's one of our key values, core values, right? We have like surfaced this up over a number of different examples across this past year for a number of different, our team members are doing this daily now. And our CS leader jumping into things and having the initiative to kind of like look at things a little bit differently, develop dashboarding, our marketing folks looking at various creative programming and content that they can drive into it, our sales folks. I mean, it runs across the board for us. And really a lot of organizations lose that as they talk about it and then they hyperscale before they've even really matured this whole like what are the values and like
Yeah.
how do we embed them. And so we help them with embedding those values across the organization, help them turn them, basically bring them to life through recognition and rewards and incentives, and then also run interesting programming around that through challenges that might be specific to a core value. Like, how did you see this person, doing this specific thing, over a week period? Like, submit your best answers around certain things. Those are the types of things that really bring the organization together. I think, again, going back to the whole idea of like a tactical employee experience, you can have the tactical employee experience covered. Like, yeah, this is best in class. I can find where I need to go. I've got the ability to do communication and things like that. But am I really emotionally tied into this organization? Have I like tied into the philosophy of the values and like the things that they stand for? Have they brought those to life in the right way? And we partner with our organizations to do that so they can really get to that extraordinary level, right? Not just sort of average.
Yeah. So some of the like for example, I think it's ethereal. How do you have core values? How do you actually do core values? So one of the things we do, for example, is in hiring. So when we hire, we have this thing called GWC core values, and what that means is we measure the candidate across. Do they get it? Do they want it? Do they have the capacity to do the work? And then how do they stack against our 5 core values? And then we have kind of a ranking system. So we try to kind of get it early on in the process. Is this a core values fit plus the technical stuff?
Yeah.
Another way we do it is we do quarterly themes, and the theme's always core value based, and then we have like a whole challenge around that kind of thing. What are you guys seeing work in terms of like what are some of the example events and kind of activities in Cooleaf that are effective?
Relative to core values you're talking about?
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah, so I think the first thing that we've seen really work well is like identifying those as sort of areas that can be recognized and identifying the leaders that can take those and start recognizing publicly. So the 3 hallmarks of great recognition, right? Public, frequent, meaningful, right? And so as people start seeing these things being demonstrated, both from a peer-to-peer recognition standpoint and a manager staff standpoint, they're like, oh, wow, like number one, it has the benefit of like understanding what other people in your organization are doing that you may not be in touch with day to day. Number two, it has the benefit of like understanding what that value means and like how leadership and how management thinks about that core value and like that demonstration of that core value, right? So that's really like one of the most effective things that we've seen is like starting to have team, like our platform is not sitting like someone in the ivory tower at the C level, like using it every day to like recognize people. Although that's great, like we don't typically see that, like,
Yeah.
we see it like often like really, really propagate at the manager level, right? And like at those line leader levels where it's like, hey, Joe did awesome today. Like, I just wanted to call out the fact that like he thought through something that like, blah, 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 right? And so that recognition, what happens as a result is number one, it's documented as part of that person's sort of like transcript record, if you will, that employee record that can be then pushed into core HR systems, things like that. Number two, it's, from a performance review standpoint, whether you're going to quarterly performance reviews or even more rapid than that, something that the employee can have as a set record about like all the different types of recognitions that they've received. Number three, it's like, you can tie some points to that make
Yeah.
it more meaningful in terms of a small monetary award, and that can be turned into things like Amazon gift cards, like Airbnb gift cards, whatever it might be, like merchandise, things like that. And that's a large part of what we do, right? Is like tying that into small monetary points and value. So really, in a nutshell, like it's all those things together that help to kind of propagate those core values. The other piece that we've seen is like, yeah, that's great in terms of like kind of ongoing rewards recognition. Like I was talking about challenges, those challenges can be used in a way to emphasize in particular parts of the year, times of the year, maybe different values, right? So a lot of what we're doing right now, it's Earth Day coming up, and so there's a ton of different challenges going on across all of our companies, and for the most part, a lot of our customers are heavily emphasizing sustainability and green values to their employee base because they know this is something that their
Yeah.
employees really care about. And so April 22nd, right, it's a couple of days coming up, is Earth Day. So there's big challenges going on across all of our organizations around Earth Day. Show yourself doing something eco-friendly this week. What did you do, in terms of recycling, or maybe taking a day for meatless Monday, whatever it might be, right? There's a whole variety of things that we can do. And then again, this propagates this idea that like, yeah, we don't just talk about sustainability, we're actually living it, right?
Yeah. So me and a couple other folks in our company, we spend the time to try to think up the quarterly themes and then execute upon them, which typically translates to like some kind of message in Slack and some voting systems.
Yeah.
And it's easy to underestimate how much effort it is to think up ideas to engage employees and then to execute them. And we're
Oh
30
yeah.
folks. So I can
Yeah.
imagine at 1,500 people, like it's a big burden off someone's shoulders
Oh
to
yeah.
think of the idea and actually execute it. So that's,
Yeah, I mean, what to your point, I mean, it's interesting to see like we've worked with so many different organizations across different industries, and one of the common themes there is like typically between that 100 to 1,000 employees, right? 300, 500, 600 employees, 800 employees. What you start seeing is like the scaling is starting to happen, but the HR folks are maybe a department of like two
yeah,
or three at most, right? And they've got, benefits. They've got, different types of like employee issues that they're dealing with. They've got programming that they're trying to like sort of do in addition to that. Now, what we do is we really partner with those organizations to say, nothing to worry about in terms of that programming piece. We're going to not only pulse this, we're going to actually be able to create programs that essentially run on their own and that will optimize with you in quarterly business reviews to kind of show you what the data shows and how do we want to tweak those. But like our CS team is phenomenal, and that's really what we do is like partner with our customers to say, you don't have the bandwidth to take this on and you need a partner around this, and we can have the software and the technology and the platform to kind of operationalize this program, but have the CS team to be able to creatively come to board with like a whole library of different opportunities that we've already developed that can be put into place pretty quickly to your organization.
yep, makes total sense. Back on the business front, so about client acquisition, how did you get clients, say, a year or two into this versus how do you get clients today? Is it through partnerships? Or you guys do you have a secret formula of marketing that we should all know about?
Yeah. Yeah, seriously. I wish. We've done a lot with direct sales. Like, you know, my co-founder has, obviously built up a lot of his capabilities in terms of, we built the team out around really what I'll call kind of like your traditional SaaS BDR type AAE model. I mean, we're doing a lot with outbound. We've started to do, and we started to really just get our feet wet with marketing now, but we're doing quite a bit with interesting programming that's resonating pretty well. Like next week, for example, we're going to be doing a session with a partner of ours named Care Validate, which is an organization that does a lot with COVID vaccination and sort of passports and technology that relates to that. A lot of organizations now are starting to think about how do I get my employees back into at least a hybrid environment? How do I encourage vaccination? How do I ensure that they've got vaccination that's been done and like both shots are completed? Can I give them a little thank you and a small appreciation and small incentive around that? We're actually doing quite a bit of work around that. And so that the compelling programming that's like current and really drives into the issues that folks are having today tends to, be a pretty good part of our playbook also now in terms of attraction for SaaS. And so we're doing things like that. We're also, we are partnering with organizations, across the sort of landscape on sort of like creative ways to collaborate. And we're planning to do a lot more of that over the upcoming, year or so.
Yeah. How's like the whole world moving to remote? How's that changed the game for you guys? Is there new types of stuff? Has employee engagement, been on the rise? How's that impacted it?
Yeah, I actually think it's been a big, it hasn't been all great, right? Because it's been some organizations that we've worked with have maybe worked in sectors where like 30-40% of the revenue dried up like overnight because of COVID. And so those were unfortunate situations that we had to deal with, that I think a lot of organizations had to deal with. On the flip side of it, as folks started seeing like, okay, well, this isn't going away anytime soon. And like, we're going to be in this situation a lot longer than we thought. And we may be starting to come towards the light at the end of the tunnel, but still there's going to be a hybrid/remote balance here. How do we do things like sustain culture? How do we do things like scale recognition? How do we do things like, that we used to do pretty easily in town halls that can't be done anymore?
Yep.
So in that regard, every organization that's focused in on employee experience right now is I think positioned for growth. And so, rising tide lifts all boats. I think it means great things for us as well.
Have you seen, are there any differences in dynamics in terms of how to engage a workforce remotely versus like everybody being in an office together?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's, most organizations that we worked with, like they were already somewhat hybrid, right,
Sure.
to begin with. But now this has just accelerated the level of, you know, we've seen things like, yeah, like, so do you do recognition and rewards? And they're like, yeah, like we'll recognize, and then there's Susan over here has like a drawer full of like gift cards that she gives. It's like
Yeah.
literally, and like maybe someone's logging in into Google. I'm like, it's like crazy, right? Like you're like, wow, you just can't do that at a certain scale. So because of the move to remote now, that has been something that we've helped a lot of our not only new customers but existing customers start solving, because they just can't do some of those things from a process standpoint now anymore, right?
It's less accidental now, it seems like. Like you used to, even conversations, you could get water cooler talk. You'd see somebody because you sat near them. Whereas now it seems like you got to be more conscientious about that outreach. And I could see
Oh
Cooleaf
yeah,
have a big
yeah,
part in that, because how do you reward? Where I have a system around that in a program, or I'm doing
yep.
it ad hoc, and
That's
that's
right.
probably
That's
key.
right.
Yeah,
That's exactly it. And like it's also like, this idea of being more data driven about anything you're doing in the organization, right? The idea of digital transformation. I mean, this is a key part of trying to hold on and trying to engage your great folks. You know, do you have an answer for this as you move to hybrid? Do you have an answer for this as you start scaling, right? And a lot of organizations, you'd be surprised when you get under the covers. They're like, wow, like they don't have an answer for this. Like they need help here, right?
yeah, absolutely. So last question, Prem, is if you had to start a business over today, there's a lot of young entrepreneurs that listen or are thinking about starting a business.
Yeah.
What advice would you give them?
Yeah. Say, first of all, what the hell are you thinking? Um, yeah, I think it's actually one of the kind of weirdly, it's like a great time to still be out there trying to do something new right now. The tools to build are richer than they've ever been. They're more lightweight than they've ever been, which is a blessing and a curse because it's propagated so many tech companies now. But you think about sort of the one thing that I would say if I were to sort of partake, give the advice here is like, I heard this like multiple times, is like you just don't give up, right? Like, I mean, there could be a change in idea, there could be a change in sort of like overall methodology, there could be a change in tactic, but you'd be surprised like how many folks out there that you think of as like, household names now, and great examples of this, like, Webflow. Like Webflow is a phenomenal company. Okay. The guy who started it, like, it took him 3 times to get into Y Combinator. Okay. And then he couldn't raise funding after that. Right. Like, and he was like basically like about to give up, but he didn't. Right. The guys at UiPath took him, it took him 10 years to get to $1 million in annual recurring revenue. Right. And like, those are the types of things that like you don't hear about every day. And I think those are the types of stories that, entrepreneurs, if they want to do it, they're doing it to, don't do it for the money. Okay. You shouldn't do it for the money. I mean, you should do it for the ability to kind of really impact something that you're not going to be able to do in sort of a day job role. Right. And so I fully encourage folks to try to do this as much as they can on the side and get as much momentum as they can potentially prove out. I think every sector is different, but like B2B SaaS is a really exciting time to have a lot of different plays here, and just don't give up, and don't look at one idea of success as the only one, right? Like, hey, it's like sales, man, we're not Salesforce, it sucks, like, no, like, you're doing quite well and you're able to sustain, like you're doing better than most people out there, honestly. So that's kind of my advice, is like, don't give up on it. And then, scale, don't feel the need to prematurely scale either. That's what kills most companies.
Yeah, absolutely. It's good advice. I agree. Awesome. Well, it's been a pleasure talking. If you guys enjoyed this conversation and you want to hear more conversations with other entrepreneurs, you can check out Tuesday Morning Grind on any podcast app that you like. We also have a YouTube channel. You can search Risk 360 and check out the Tuesday Morning Grind podcast playlist. Prem, where can they find out more about Cooleaf if they want to?
Yeah, so Cooleaf, COOLEAF.com, or you can just email to our general inbox if you have interest or want to chat through anything or other opportunities. That's mail, MAIL, @Cooleaf.com.
Awesome. Thanks, Prem. Talk soon.
All right. Thanks so much, Christian. Appreciate it.